Hello everyone, I'm Joe Vizzani. Welcome to episode 125 of LunarCrush Live. I'm here with Alex Miller. We're at the LA Blockchain Summit. We like to bring on people that have dedicated their careers, and that's kind of what you've done. I'd love to learn a little bit more about how'd you get started.
Sure. So I originally, my first job, if you really want to rewind, just all the way back.
I do.
I did telephone fundraising for a nonprofit when I was 13 as my first job. The first time other people paid me to do stuff was that, telephone fundraising as a 13-year-old for a nonprofit.
Okay.
Then I was a computer consultant because that's way better as a teenager than working fast food, just to get rich people to pay you to fix their computers because, boomers don't know how to use, they don't know how to open Microsoft Word.
Right.
Then I went to college, was a computer engineering major. Turns out if you are a computer engineering major, you have to go to class and do a lot of math, which sucks. And so I became a political science major instead. And then I didn't have to go to class and I could start every single paper that was due the night it was due. And instead of going to class, I became an event producer, actually, on a college campus. I went down to I was at UC San Diego. We had a huge budget and huge set of productions going on the campus. And so that's what I did. I learned how to produce events and fell in love with it. It's actually a ton of fun.
Wow.
But I still also really like computers. I mean, there was a reason I was a computer engineering major. I liked building my own computers. I liked messing around with stuff. I liked building overly complex systems that took me 3 hours to set up and saved me 3 minutes of time. Still do that with home automation today. And so I was I know I still want to go into tech, right? So I graduate school and I get a job in tech PR because I'd interned there and could do it. Was very heavily networking, meeting people, and ended up kind of swinging over into operations. Worked with Jason Calacanis out in LA, went to work for Yext in New York City.
Oh, wow.
Spent 8.5 years at Stack Overflow, if you ever heard of that website.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Glad to hear it. So everything from chief of staff and running operations to, biggest thing I did there is I started the entire enterprise and private Q&A business and scaled that up. And so I very heavy Web 2 background, right? Especially time at Stack Overflow. Got a lot of time spending about how do people work together? How are communities formed? How do things work online and through these giant disparate global social groups? So did that, and then a few years ago I'm thinking about it, I'm okay, so what's next, right? I'd been using the internet since the early days of it. Not quite the super earliest Usenet dialing into a random server in a basement, but Prodigy and CompuServe, then AOL, and then random stuff. I actually just recently met the founders of NetZero at a event, and I'm oh my god, I love you guys. They weren't the founders, they were two of the very early employees though.
Yeah.
It's oh my god, I was so early on that and I loved it, and the access that it gave so many people who weren't going to pay for a lot of other ISPs for it. It was an amazing innovation, amazing development. And so I was kind of sitting around, and I'd already gotten pretty orange-pilled on Bitcoin as the store of value thing, right? There's other cryptos that are going on. There's clearly future potential to this. But Bitcoin's definitely a thing. It's not going anywhere. But at the same time, you've got this whole greater capability that crypto provides, right? This next generation internet. And so then I got introduced to the Stacks team in early 2021. So ironically, I learned about it a lot later than a lot of folks did. I will constantly meet people who are like, "Oh my God, you're the CEO of Hiro. I love Stacks," and they're telling me about how they bought it as the ICO, or they bought back when it was one name and in 2014, 2015, and I'm it's awesome. This. They'll ask me all these questions. Man, you honestly know more about those super early days than I do. I know a lot about the current days.
Yeah.
But I did find Stacks actually a little bit later. But from the second I found it, I knew that it was something special. And that was both because of the team behind at Hiro and the folks that were there, but also just immediately how much sense it made. It's clear that we need some kind of technology to take us to the next generation on internet and on communication, right? The internet's great, but there's a lot of problems, especially around the Web 2 business models and the incentives it creates. As the world's kind of getting smaller, we need things that give equal opportunity to everyone around the world.
Question for you around, you kind of talked a little bit about being stoked on the infrastructure provider, a NetZero, and then you kind of this is kind of the ethos a little bit of Web3 is I think people don't understand as much is, they're oh, we're just building all the the Web 2 models in Web3. There's nothing new. And I feel they completely are missing the idea that it's the disruption of everything as an infrastructure.
I think Web 3 is taking more from Web 1 than Web 2.
Okay.
Web 1 was built on decentralization originally, right? Like the original idea behind much of the internet, especially once it spread from outside of like the national laboratories, was cool, everyone runs a server in their basement. Like that's decentralization, right? Now the problem is, turns out that's actually really complicated to have everyone running a server in their basement. That's a lot of technical overhead, and the experience isn't great. And this is why Web 2 took off the way that it did and was so big. Is it's like, oh my God, look at the power of connecting all these people around the world. But look at how easy it is. I can sign up for a freaking Facebook account. Right. I think the real long-term potential, or at least one of the really big things that Web 3 can do in the long term, is how do you mesh those two? The ease of use of Web 2, but the decentralization and the ownership of Web 1, right? And then actually, if you add 1 plus 2, you get
Web 3.
There you go.
That was beautiful.
And so I think that's really one of the big promises there is like, I've been wanting to delete my damn Instagram account for years, but I can't. And why can I not do it? Because there is a social graph on it. There's a social graph that is locked up there, and once I delete that account, even if I go create a new Instagram account, gone forever. I will never be able to get back that connection set and the approved follows and all that stuff and not.
Yeah, there's a lot of settings and control right there that I think people don't realize that you've put the work in on.
Yeah.
That is, and it's almost like lock-in.
I should have that.
Yeah.
That's my data. That's my relationships with other people. I should not be dependent on having to like keep letting Meta, Facebook, whatever the hell they're called, track me around the internet in order to just like keep that one frickin' JSON file of connections. And again, this is where we come back to the promise of Web3. Make it easy for people, but also fundamentally it's their data, their control. They can do what they want. They can opt out when they want. They can opt in when they want. And like, that's what I want.
It's important. And I like your analogy there of it's more like rebuilding Web 1. Which I haven't heard that a lot, but it's so true, right? Web 2 with apps and everything, it's like we haven't figured out like the killer dApps yet even of Web 3 because we're still building the Web 1 side of that. Yep. I think that's a perfect analogy. I want to kind of linger a little bit though back on Stack Overflow. You spent a lot of time there, it sounds like, and when you started talking about the community there, right? There is so much community there. It's kind of like Wikipedia for development problems in a way and engineering problems. And so what did you learn about communities specifically at like a Stack Overflow? I mean, there's these crazy threads.
You realize we're here for like 50 minutes, right? That is an entire multi-hour conversation.
Give me the condensed, you've got to have some sort of mini essay on that.
Let's focus on the things that I think are really important for people, especially who are building in Web 3. Mm-hmm. Number one, you need to learn the differences between intrinsic motivations and extrinsic motivations. And that's basically, intrinsic being the stuff like just in here, my inherent motivations, extrinsic being, look at, it's a shiny object, here's a coin, do a thing. There's some really interesting dynamics there. In particular, you can destroy intrinsic motivation by introducing extrinsic motivators. So like one question we always got at Stack Overflow was like, let me please pay someone for an answer. Well, guess what? If you start saying that if you answer these questions, you get paid, not only will you not get answers to a lot of those questions, people will stop answering all the other questions they were answering for free. Because it's like, well, why would I answer anything if I can get paid? But you know what? You might be willing to easily pay $20 or even $100 to answer it. But finding the questions to answer might take hours, right? Or testing the solutions might take hours. The economic trade-off's actually terrible. People do it because they like the feeling that they get from helping, from providing it, right? One of the biggest answers on Stack Overflow, this guy named John Skeet, Google engineer in London. He lived outside London in a town called Reading. He's got like an hour and a half commute on the train each way every day. Well, he's got a laptop with a 3G, kind of, at the time 3G, then 4G, I'm sure it's 5G now, connection. Yeah. He could just sit there like entertaining himself and killing an hour because if he knew the answer and could help someone and save them some time, that was great from him. The other actually interesting thing we knew is people would express surprise to me that if you go look at the front page of top users on Stack Overflow, there's a location you won't see very much of. That's anywhere in Silicon Valley.
Interesting.
And our thesis on this from talking to people was that people in Silicon Valley tended to, we're talking about laws of averages here, right? When you're talking about 20 million people, 50 million people on a website, it's all about laws of averages. But on average, people in Silicon Valley are going to be more into their work and more fulfilled by their work. They're getting to do cool new stuff, right? And if you're working at an insurance company, at a mid-market insurance company in Cincinnati, Ohio, you're probably not as much. You're building and maintaining internal systems, but you might be just as into and just as skilled as these guys who are sitting in Silicon Valley startups. So you know how you get your fix, or you know what at least some of those guys were doing to like feel better, to really get back their love of programming? They're going on Stack Overflow every night and helping people solve problems. And that's why they became like the top users.
That's just like such an optimistic way to look at the world, that like it makes me feel really good, is that there's all these people that are trying to help, right? They're all looking for a fulfillment in the role they have or in the job they have. And yes, there's this kind of concentration of those people that are working on really difficult problems, right? And that's ultimately, I feel like, an engineering mindset is, can I give you an ultimate problem to solve that's gonna get you excited and get you going? That's the drive for all of it.
I mean, welcome to being humans. Like humans want to build and achieve and do things.
Do you think that what do you think is one or two of the traits that you learned there at a Stack Overflow that's kind of, layered itself onto the role that you have now at Hiro? I mean, it's, like community building is everything. Like at LunarCrush, like our first tagline was, without a community, there is no crypto, right? And it was all driven by that community. And you seem to have really understand incentives and the community kind of building there. And so how does that kind of overlay now into what you're doing?
The number one is, again, you can't just pay people to do stuff, right? You've seen this is actually a big problem in a lot of crypto, is every ecosystem, when it starts to get hot, like throws together an ecosystem fund and just starts paying people to come build.
Yeah.
Which means you get the people who are willing to just move and change what they're doing to basically de-optimize their choice based on where there's money. Now, there's obviously a certain minimum amount of money and resources that people need to do. And so you've got to figure out what that is. But usually, again, it's more about the support and the capabilities you can provide them than just straight money. Straight money is going to warp your incentives kind of all over the place. So that's something that I think I've really noticed too when talking to builders in the Stacks community. We had a developer survey back like at the beginning of this year or late last year. So during the height of the bull run, we just had the sort of middle of the bear market survey from like July, August, and there's a lot of great stats in there, a lot of interesting information. You can check out hero.so/blog. But one of the things is that the numbers around optimism didn't really go down. The numbers around like their ratings on our products didn't really go down. And that's because Stacks is an ecosystem that's never really been based on the hype of a lot of other ecosystems. And so the folks that are here to actually build something. They're happy. They understand the choice they made. They're happy with the choice that they made. And it means they're just kind of going heads down and continuing to build.
Maybe you can just kind of talk a little bit about just Stacks specifically. Like, what is Stacks?
Yeah. So Stacks is a layer that makes Bitcoin programmable. That's simply put, right? If you look, Bitcoin is like the oldest, the most trusted, the most well-known, the most secure blockchain that's out there. It's also very basic, right? I mean, go back, this is actually one of the beauties of it too. Go back and read the original Bitcoin white paper, which of course just had its 14th birthday.
It's wild, isn't it?
I know, congratulations. So close to driving a car. And if you go back and read that white paper, I mean, it is simple, right? It's, 10 pages or something like
short.
that. It's written in human language. I mean, you have to understand at least something about economics and a little bit about technology, but like you don't have to be a cryptographer to understand that paper. And there's a lot that's not necessarily out in it, but the real meat of it, it's there. It lays out what it is, but it also lays out the simplicity of the Bitcoin system. It is a way to, I think actually one of the misnomers is people think it's a way to move money, and it is. It's a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. But what it fundamentally is it's a way to decentralize trust. That is the true Bitcoin innovation. Decentralizing trust by giving a way for this massive group of people who don't know who each other are to agree on what truth is and have an immutable record of it. So on one hand, it's not programmable. But on the other hand, it is like the ideal base for programmability because it gives a way for a totally anonymous distributed group of people to decide what truth is and agree on it forever.
Yeah, it's a massive truth machine.
Exactly. And so what Stacks does is Stacks comes in and says, cool, we've got this layer of truth. We're going to build all of the programmability and compute capability on top of that and secured back by it. Because once a stack blocks close, it uses our unique what we call proof of transfer mechanism, which writes a hash of all the transactions back into the Bitcoin chain. And so once that happens, if you want to like hack or modify the Stacks chain, cool, you have to modify Bitcoin chain,
right?
Which is not going to happen.
Right.
So that's the thing that does it. Just brings all of the smart contract and app functionality that you're used to from like Ethereum or wherever else, but lets you build on top of Bitcoin.
Talking about hacking Bitcoin. I remember I was doing the math on what it would take to like fork it and do a 51% attack, and then I started to get to like, it was like multiple trillions, and I just stopped.
Yeah.
Because I was like, it's just not.
Also, like, God forbid you try and go back, I don't know, even like 5, let
Yeah.
alone 10, 20, or 100 blocks or something. Like, you're not going back and rewriting old Bitcoin blocks and establishing a new chain.
Let's talk a little bit about, there's 10,000 tokens out there. There's all these different layer ones that are out there. And, it was always, very fundamental to me, when I first like saw like Blockstack and I saw everything going on there, I was like, oh, of course, why aren't we all building on Bitcoin, right? And so I think I still have that question a little bit though right now of why aren't we all building on Bitcoin? Because I think, when you had the aha moment, you saw stacks, like the same for me. I was like, holy shit, like, yes, like Bitcoin, we should all be building on Bitcoin if we all really want to have this kind of conceded effort together to change the world. And I kind of have this theory almost in Web3 that we almost have maybe too many entrepreneurs. It's still early, but maybe talk a little bit about like when will we all be building on Bitcoin, and like what are some of the things that you guys are trying to build and kind of spur that community to make it happen?
There's a lot of places I can take that conversation. So first off, we're not going to ever all be building on Bitcoin, if only because like I'm a believer in a multi-chain world. I think most people who know what they're talking about in crypto realize it's going to be a multi-chain world.
I agree with you.
But Bitcoin's always going to be a very big part of it, both as a hard currency, but also if we have our way and do this right, as a layer for building on top of. So why is not? Well, Bitcoin was not built, and it's interesting because on one hand, Satoshi from like very early on, you can find his writings online in 2010 on some of the forums, talking about how he saw, like, in the future, someone will build a layer that settles back onto Bitcoin and provides like functionality to it. But at the same time, Bitcoin itself does nothing to integrate or support that very well. And in a lot of ways, that's a good thing. Keeping the underlying, that super secure trust layer as simple as possible, making it hard for people to update, that's how you build confidence and reliability into it. But it is a hard technical problem to do. That's why we spent years working on it in Stacks. But I think we've got it. You can build everything you want now. A lot of the community has envisioned a lot of great upgrades that'll be coming over the next 6, 12, and 18 months. To make it even better, faster block times, new types of native assets, just all kinds of additional capability. It goes back to it's not an easy problem there.
Right.
So I think as we go though, it's interesting if you look at like the macro environment right now, right? We're obviously going into a bear market, not just for crypto, but for the world economy as a whole.
Right.
I've been having this debate with people. I think we've still got one more boom and bust cycle before crypto is really the thing, right? It's not quite mature enough in this bust cycle, but you're going to see a lot of use cases that I think basically what this down cycle in the global economy is going to do is it's going to identify all the use cases where people really don't trust governments anymore, where they really want just an alternative option. Those use cases are all going to get built and really spread through the next boom cycle. Mm-hmm. And then when the next bust cycle hits, so whether that's 4 or 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever it is, that's when I think the switch flips on crypto.
So let's talk about macro a little bit because, Bitcoin Genesis block, January 3rd, 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, right? Like that was the thesis in a way. Like you have one thing to say, it's like that was if you can put, one thing in a push notification and send it to everyone in the world, like that was Satoshi's way of doing it. That's like a very fundamental thing. And, we have these cycles of overspending, inflation, austerity, overspending, inflation, austerity, right? And like we just went through this, massive money printing cycle here where now there's twice as much cash out there that there was, in all of human history. And now we're kind of seeing the effects of that from an inflation standpoint. But this is the first time with Bitcoin, even, like you said, 14 years ago with the white paper, it's the first time people can opt out a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. This is the optionality. It's very, in my mind, it's very early still with everything.
Well, and you're seeing people do that. Not really in the U.S., and I think it's going to be, I think people take for granted just how stable and reliable the legal and financial systems in like the U.S. and Western Europe and some other places are. Like you can point out they're not totally fair. I've got plenty of issues with them myself, but it's pretty damn reliable, right? That is not true in a lot of other places. So I think actually the thing that will ultimately really drive crypto to acceptance is dollar-denominated stablecoins. Because like it or not, and a lot of the original Bitcoin OGers, obviously very much hard money people who don't like the dollar, the US dollar is still the global reserve currency. It's going to be for at least a while. And by that, I mean at least another 10, probably closer to 20 years, right? Losing reserve currency status takes a long time.
Yeah.
And so dollar-denominated stablecoins, I think, are going to be absolutely huge as we go through. They are the thing that is probably most primed to be widely used. And you can already see this happening in a lot of South American countries. They do not want to use their local currencies. Their local currencies are pegged to an exchange rate that is complete and utter bullcrap.
Yeah.
And so, you've got the official exchange rate and you've got the black market exchange rate. But even there, people don't want to use the local currency. But they can't really be using dollars, especially online, because the government won't allow it. And dollar-denominated stablecoins are like the key for them there. And that helps build crypto acceptance. Once that's done, I think that's where I was saying, like, okay, well, if we then have another, boom cycle, and then we hit another bust cycle, and people start to lose faith in the dollar as a reserve currency, right? But at the same time, they've now understood, okay, I'm used to using crypto for regular transactions, or here's a currency I can come back to that, like, okay, Bitcoin's now stabilized out. It's got enough technology and use cases attached to it that a lot of the speculative part of it's gone down, so it's more stable. That's where I think it really starts to give people an off-ramp into saying, okay, you know what? I do want a credible alternative to state-run currencies.
You almost have like a test of that in some of the kind of the hardcore communities of Bitcoin, though, because they look at everything versus BTC, right? Everything versus BTC, where right now it's like BTC versus USD, right? Bitcoin versus US dollars. But I like what you're saying there, because it's almost like at some point here, when you're going to the grocery store and you're like, I'm going to buy some milk, and it's this many sats.
Yeah.
It's this many because it's 0.0000 whatever, per sat. And so I think, that's going to take time, though, right?
Yep.
And it's like we're at this kind of nascent part of the industry, and we're all here, we're building out this different infrastructure, we're trying to figure out what these speculative assets are, and like we're building companies, and they're partially Web 2, partially Web 3. Like, how do we lead like the next 10 to 15 years? Like, how do we, like, what are some of the things that you would love to see? You wake up in 10 years and you're like, hey, this thing is built, I get to use this dApp for this every day. Like some very basic kind of infrastructure tactical things that you'd love to like be using.
Yeah. So number one is I want stuff that bridges the gap globally. Obviously, the internet's already done an amazing job doing this and giving opportunities to people all over the world to access like the global market. Mm-hmm. I want to see applications built on crypto that take that to the nth degree, especially because, again, all of a sudden, hey, I don't need a US passport to access an account in the same banking, in effect, banking network, because I have a crypto wallet that lets me do that. That's a big deal. I want to see that expanded. I want to see contracts on the chain. There's literal smart contracts, and there's just like contracts on chain that allow people access to that do.
I own this house, I own this car, we did this transaction for this boat, whatever it may be.
There's, I think all of the attempts at credentialism on the blockchain have been crap so far. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. They've not been right so far.
Right.
But I think the fundamental idea of allowing people to demonstrate who they are and what their competencies and what their history is, again, goes back to what's the innovation on Bitcoin? Decentralizing trust. Making communications channels, making credentialism channels, making legal channels, making financial channels that just tear down the borders between countries and allow anyone sitting anywhere to have the same access and the same opportunity. Like, that's what I want to see 10 years from now in crypto.
And, to kind of bring that back to Hiro and to Stacks a little bit. I mean, John and I talk about this a lot, on my team here, and we talk about, if this government's going to, have a CBDC, or if they're going to release some sort of currency, it's like, well, what chain do they use, right? Like, how do you decide? It's like, are they going to
build their own? I think
they potentially do.
They're not going to endorse an official chain.
But if you think about if Bitcoin got to a place, or Ethereum gets to a place where it's just so ubiquitous, right? Everyone's using it. There's EVM compatibility, right, across, bridges. I think still, there's a lot to be, a lot to be expected there in the future. But I mean, when you think about some of these countries that are going to say, hey, we're battling for companies, we're battling for talent, we're trying to bring these people in. If I'm going to go to El Salvador and they're going to build their own chain, I'm kind of like, well, why wouldn't you just spin up this or use this consensus, right? Like, are we going to get to a spot where sovereign countries are going to be choosing chains to build these things on?
Probably. Almost certainly. And I think it's good. Competition is a good thing. I mean, this is why I want there to be a multi-chain world. It would be bad for Bitcoin if there was never any other crypto out there, because it pushes us to be better, right? This is true of anything and everything, especially when it comes to serving end users. Look, I'm a fan of self-custody. I keep all of my stuff in self-custody. Self-custody sucks.
Yeah, it does.
And it will never actually get that much better. I mean, the first time I left my house after starting self-custody stuff and left like $100,000 or something in my house alone. And like, I get it. It's on like a little drive and I could have recovered it, but it still felt weird. I'd never leave $100,000 in cash in my house or something like that. People aren't going to want self-custody at wide scale, not for their life savings for the most part. But what they will want is like trusted third parties that they can custody with, that isn't like tied to, just, well, again, I live in this country, so I have to use this thing, right? People are going to want solutions that are trustless. And this is a lot of what I think is looking at getting built on stacks, and is again, what Bitcoin enables is, cool, how can I like keep my life savings that I can relatively instantly move it between different providers. I don't have to trust any one person with it. And if something happens to the country that I live in, like, I'm not screwed. That's a really powerful combination in a world that's getting kind of increasingly chaotic and difficult to live in. I really hope that I think we will see people build that. And I think part of that's going to get built on stacks and Bitcoin.
I agree with you. And I think people would say, oh, we're so far away from that. And, I think we've seen that, though, in the last year. If you're living, in parts of Europe, or if you're in Ukraine, or if you're in Russia, and, suddenly you can't go across a border because maybe, it's not because you're held back, but maybe there's a bunch of fighting going on in that direction. And you're not going to basically have like a wheelbarrow of gold and like,
So look, I'm a bit of a prepper.
Yeah. Okay.
A bit. I'm not.
Okay,
like
it comes out.
I'm not a crazy prepper. I don't believe in bunkers, for instance. I think bunkers are stupid because, like, you have to have a community, right? The entire idea of like total self-sufficiency is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
People, A, are social animals, and B, they don't have that good of skills. But like community level, regional level self-sufficiency, it's a great thing. You should absolutely do what I did and move somewhere that you actually have other people you can be with and build a community and rely upon. But all of that said, I'll talk to people, or like even my mom asked me when we're moving, and she's like, do you really think like there's an apocalypse coming? I'm like, no. Apocalypse, it's stupid. And I don't want to survive nuclear war.
Right.
But more weirdness is coming. It's partly just a fact of living in a like more global, interconnected world. It's partly the fact that, like it or not, like, yes, global warming is a real thing and the weather's going to fuck you up more.
Yeah.
But I'll say to people like that, I'll say, like, look, if you want to understand the need for prepping, can you imagine a situation in which you didn't want to leave your house or have any contact with the outside world for a 2-week period? Now, number one, if you can't imagine that, like, it happened 2.5 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
February, March of 2020.
Yeah.
So you better be able to imagine that this is something that can happen. And do you have everything you need to just survive for 2, 3, 4 weeks if you don't want to have that outside contact? And like, you put it in that very real, tangible terms and point out, like, this literally just happened.
We thought toilet paper was going to be currency for a second there.
Right. So yeah, there is people. You need to have an eye on, like, okay, what are my alternatives? And I'm not saying become a hermit or move somewhere. What I am saying is you've really got to have the mental flexibility to think about, like, what if a lot of the stuff that I can take for granted today, I can't take for granted?
Yeah.
And yeah, as you pointed out, there's a lot of people in Kiev.
Yeah.
In other parts of the country and in a lot of different places doing that exact thing today.
Well, you said, getting weird, and it's actually a great descriptor. My example was, it was like the second week right as COVID was happening, and I was like, I just need to go for a walk, right? And so I go down to the beach, and like my friend and I, we're social distancing, and we're sitting there, and we've got our coffee, and it was, it kind of turned into this thing for us. But we go down to the pier, and there's no one there. Mm-hmm. But then we see this like kind of old school, crusty local surfer guy that's out there, and we see him, and my friend knows him, and he's like, oh, hey, what's up? He goes, pretty weird, right? And then he turns back to us and he just goes, could get weirder. Mm-hmm. And then we turn around, he's gone. It's just like, did that actually happen? Did that happen? No, that did happen. I have a verified source on that.
You were hallucinating.
It's not on the blockchain, not on the truth machine. It's not on the truth machine, but the insight there was, it could get a little bit weirder. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I think as humans, we're not really prepared for that. Maybe we don't want to think about that. We just want to kind of continue to move forward. But we do have to take steps to say, how do you protect yourself? How do you have a little bit of more self-responsibility when it comes to, understanding what financials are? Like, people are talking about inflation, people are talking about money printing, everyone's becoming an investor. Like, that was not the case. Like, growing up, like, a lot of people didn't know what credit cards were. They didn't get a bank account until they were a certain age. And now you've got kids playing certain games at 12 years old that know what a private key is. They know what an NFT is. They know how to transfer money around. They know what, DeFi is. And it's like the education that's happening here, I think, is what is very beautiful. So I don't know if you'd agree with that. It was just like a little brain fart of mine.
I mean, I don't love the idea of educating kids on credit cards that early. Maybe we don't need to teach them
or just
that,
understanding maybe the negative side of what a credit card is, right?
Understanding how the world works, understanding how humans interact and build with each other and team up, and what the challenges to that are. Absolutely.
So we've got about a couple minutes left here. I want to just, what is Stacks up to right at this second? Like, are you guys hiring, looking for developers? Are you trying to grow the community? You've got a lot of big releases coming up too.
Yeah. So like I said, I run Hiro, which is the dev tools company for the Stacks ecosystem. So if you're interested in helping build all of the tools that are going to build this next generation internet on top of Bitcoin, come check us out. Hiro.so, hiro.so/careers if you want a job. Or especially if you're a good blockchain engineer, we always need good blockchain engineers. You can also check out stacks.co, which is the community website that the Stacks community maintains. There's a lot of great information about Stacks, how to start building in it if you're looking for a good chain and community to be building and a part of. And then if you want great shit posting on Twitter, Alex L. Miller on Twitter. I cannot recommend.
Can't tag you in photos, by the way. You got to change that setting. I got to tag you on stuff.
Oh, do I have that blocked?
Elon's got it though now, so it's okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm not verified yet. So, but I promise.
Fork up that $8 a month.
Dude, I don't know. That's a lot, man.
I get HBO Max for $10 a month, and I get Game of Thrones. I don't know if it's the same entertainment value.
No, the key is if it got rid of ads. $8 a month for no. I've actually said for a while I'd pay $10 or $20 a month tomorrow to get rid of all the damn ads on Twitter.
I agree with that.
But no, I love Twitter as a connection point. It's an amazing place for meeting people and connecting. And just being with other folks. So just got to ignore all the trolls.
Cool. Alex Miller, CEO of Hiro.